everyone, and welcome back to the second part of our training seminar. Today we're going to be focusing on the phases of training, and our tagline today is there's a time and place for all kinds of training, or there's a time and place for everything. And yesterday we focused on or talked about being systematic with your training, to have a system in place for everything. We touched on the basics, and today we're going to cover more specifically with optimum performance training what the system is and the different levels of training. And you know, for the most part, when you go into a fitness facility, when you look at a fitness facility, you know, one of the things I'm most proud about our industry is that things are getting better and better and better. People are being more aware of what they're doing. The trainers and coaches are getting better, and therefore the advice is getting better. We have new types of studios opening up, so things are changing, and that's a wonderful thing. But we're still seeing a lot of the same problems, and there's a lot more education that needs to happen, because people will go in, they'll exercise, they'll work out, and a lot of it's just using machines, going through the motions, not being systematic or having a plan, and it has nothing to do with desire. It has everything to do with, you know, them just not knowing. So the more and more education comes along, the more and more people are going to be more, you know, readily have the tools available to be better with their training. So when we talk about the specifics with optimum performance training, and you know, as far as what are the different, I guess we would call it phases of training. We basically, I'm going to talk about 7 different phases of training today. But we're going to first build it into 3 blocks, which we can categorize all training into. And the first block is going to be stabilization training. Stabilization training generally is where we're going to start all people off. And those that have never worked out before, and there's a lot for stabilization training that all people can benefit from, whether they're, you know, advanced bodybuilders, people that are looking to build muscle, lose fat, or people who are athletes. Stabilization needs to be in all parts of people's training. But let's talk about the other. Step 2 is strength training, and step 3 is power training. So focusing still on stabilization. A person who is in great shape, say someone wanting to build muscle and lose fat, they could do a combination of stabilization and strength training. But someone who's just starting off, they couldn't do strength training because they haven't yet gone through stabilization. Stabilization is the first step. It is the ground floor. You can't step above it until you first go through stabilization training. Consequently, someone who is an athlete, someone who's been trained appropriately for power, they're going to be able to be stable, they're going to have the strength, and they're going to be able to perform at maximum output. So they're going to be able to do all 3 phases of training. However, taking like a beginner, for instance, someone who's deconditioned, they're not going to be able to get into strength or power training until they first go into stabilization training. So there are steps that we must go through. Let's focus a little bit on what stabilization training is. And I'm going to give you some bullet points. I've made some notes, so I'm going to be looking off my notes to give you some bullet points on what stabilization training actually does. Stabilization training, and we're limited on our time, so if I'm leaving anything out, please forgive me. When we coach and teach people, we get much more in depth with a lot of these things. But stabilization training, number 1, it helps to correct muscular imbalances. As I mentioned yesterday, almost everybody has muscular imbalances. And, you know, it's only through monitoring that person, watching what they're doing, evaluating that person, can you find out where their muscular imbalances are. Because, as I've said in previous seminars, when the human body, although you are told that everyone's unique, everyone's different, the human body moves in the same way for each person, or is supposed to move in the same way. So whenever you have compensations or anything, it stems back from muscular imbalances. The muscle is supposed to be at a certain length for each particular muscle. And when that muscle gets out of length, when it's not at the appropriate length, what you're going to have is you're going to have one muscle that is going to be too tight, and the opposite, or the antagonist of that particular muscle, is going to be weakened. And this is a very simplistic way to look at it, but to kind of tell you my point, when you have your bicep, let's say your bicep is tight, all the time. Let's say it's in a tightened position because you always walk around like this. Well, what will happen naturally then is the tricep then is going to naturally be lengthened because it's always in a lengthened position. Well, the bicep stays overly tight, the tricep stays lengthened, and what ends up happening is you have a muscular imbalance because the bicep is not made or meant to be in this tightened position. It's made to be more at at what it was designed to be in this position. So therefore, a overly tight muscle, it's not just the bicep, it's also the tricep that's lengthened and weak. So there has to be, to correct muscular imbalances, to get muscles at their optimal length, they'll then perform. This will hold true for everything with the, with the lower body, the legs, the calves. When there's imbalances there, you'll have overly tight muscles, underactive or lengthened muscles, and it's going to cause for movement compensations where the movement of the body will start changing and adapting, and it will just start doing that, and the way the body's supposed to move is then altered because of muscular imbalances, which then can cause a lot of injuries and pain and so forth. So the core of stabilization training is to correct muscular imbalances. Then, of course, we're just covering things very generally, nothing specifically, but then the other key in stabilization training is to improve the stabilization of the musculature. So when someone is beginning, one of the most important things is their body is not stable enough. Their body has not been used to overload on the muscles, so simply providing more stability to that particular muscle is going to be very important. So you can't do a lot of weight. You can't do a lot of repetitions. You have to start off with a slow and steady tempo. Stabilization is about slow, steady tempo, tons of time under tension, with proper form, correcting muscular imbalances to put everything in line and make the body more stable. So in stabilization, you're not doing a lot of tissue overload. You're not using a lot of weight on that particular muscle. And because what you're trying to do is prepare your body to go into more rigorous activity, to do more strength-oriented training, to do more, to do more power-oriented or performance-oriented training. Another important thing during stabilization training is to improve the cardiovascular system and what we consider neuromuscular training, the relation between the nervous and muscular system. Your muscles don't just move. There's a signal that makes your muscles move. Even just me moving my hands, my brain has to send signals to my muscles in order for them to move. So there is a relation between the nervous and muscular system. We call it neuromuscular conditioning and stabilization-oriented training. Things that have slower tempos, that focus on form and technique and posture and correcting muscular imbalances and training people in an unstable surface. All of these things that go into stabilization training will improve the neuromuscular conditioning of the body. In addition, also to, we want to improve cardiovascular conditioning as well. Another key for stabilization training is movement patterns. We want to make sure that form, technique, while we maintain good posture, everything that I've been talking about for stabilization is optimal. And, in stabilization, we look at things such as having greater stability through the core. When core includes not just your abdomen, but includes your hips, your lower back. Anything that is through your trunk that does not include your limbs is your core. So having greater stability through your core, reduce muscular imbalances, greater balance. Those are all things that go into stabilization training. Greater neuromuscular control and efficiency like we were talking about, especially through the core, and better inter and intramuscular coordination. And the differences is those are things that not only are you able to properly use a particular muscle, but where all muscles synergistically can work together the way they're supposed to work together. And this is all done through less load, through less weight, through proper form, with more time under tension, with slower tempo. That is stabilization training. That is the start. that is where everyone needs to start off with. But that doesn't mean, if you think about all these things I'm talking about, stabilization training, that isn't just a beginner. Strength athletes, bodybuilders, they need portions of stabilization training. They also need, athletes also need stabilization training. In addition, and we're going to cover the other things really quick, the second concept is strength, which is basically more load, more volume. This is what people are used to. And once you have stabilization training down, then strength becomes much, much easier. And we're going to spend less time because stabilization is the key. Once you're stable, then strength is basically more load, more volume of your exercises. You then start, instead of core stabilization, you then start using your core more with more load, more weight on the core, in more movement instead of more in a static position. I'm trying to think of anything else that I've written down. There is, obviously because of more load and more volume, you're going to be able. One thing with stabilization training is people put more focus, they put more of their time in their core training and those other things, and they spend less of their time on the actual workout. Well, as you get into strength and power, more time is actually put into the workout because of the increased load. And that's going to put more of a metabolic demand. So that's a lot of your results are going to come from there, but you first have to start with stabilization training so you can be prepared to go into strength. And there's also, with strength training, there's greater motor, what we call motor unit recruitment. There is, in your body, there is type 1 and type 2 fibers. Slow twitch, fast twitch, things that are designed more for endurance and things that are designed more for strength and power. And so when you're doing strength training, your body will utilize more of that motor unit recruitment, where it will start utilizing all of that. Strength training is typically the 8 to 12 reps, 3 sets, all of that is traditional in nature. And you get into that once your body is used to doing stabilization training. Sorry, my kids just walked in. And you do that once your body is conditioned to do that, and that's the appropriate time to get into strength training. Then finally, our final phase of training is our power-oriented training. And power gets into basically just force times velocity. You can improve your power by doing a couple things. You can either increase the amount of weight that you're using, or you can increase the velocity. But if you're increasing both the weight and the velocity, or one or the other, your power is increased. And so that's the biggest thing is, with power, you're stable, you're strong, and then if you increase the force or the velocity, now you're going to be able to perform in a more powerful manner. The final thing that I want to talk about with power or anything is not only do you want to do things in this manner, but you also need to change directions, do different planes of motion, do different things that are not just straight ahead, that you're doing things all else. But the main three functions are stabilization, strength, and power. And I hope that I gave you an overview of what this is and what our different phases of training are. And in that, there are 7 different phases of training, which I'm going to cover in the second part of this video because this is a 2-part video. So I appreciate you joining us, and we'll go to the second part in just a second.
When you feel that something's wrong, I'll shelter you and keep you warm. I'll never let you walk alone.